Many years ago, I was dating a woman for a decent chunk of time who was really into astrology, although, to be frank, it was more like an obsession. And I'm bringing this up because I want to tie this into some points I'm going to make later in the video, the meat of the video, if you will. Now, this woman, when I say she was obsessed, she was truly obsessed. And so she would meet people and then talk to them for a little bit and then immediately try to ascertain their star signs. Now, due to my contact with this woman, I myself studied, if you will, examined astrology. Of course, it's all bunk, it remains bunk, but it's a little more complex than just your star sign. You see, that's your sun sign, and then you have other signs like your moon, and your rising, and your Mercury, and your Mars, and all these other things. But essentially what this woman tried to do was she would use astrology as her psychological tool of choice to understand the human world around her, her social environment, and to be perfectly honest, sometimes civilization on the whole. She'd meet somebody and try to guess what their sun was, what their moon was. When she was right about it, which was a fluke and a coincidence, she would feel vindicated and proven in her astrological beliefs. And when she was wrong, she'd come up with some other reason, usually found within astrology, to justify why she was deceived. For example, that the person might in fact be a Pisces in the sun and an Aries in the moon, but their rising sign was different. Their rising sign was a Libra or what have you. And for this individual, really everything boiled down to this. In fact, she had my entire chart plotted out to a T. We're talking about birth date, time, every planet, their position, and all the weird things that are called conjunctions and what have you. And for a number of reasons, not just this relationship was pretty difficult, and we ended up sort of mutually breaking up eventually. But I mention all of this to sort of introduce the topic of the video, which is how internet labels and internet descriptions have really ruined our ability to understand the world and essentially ruined our ability to even get along with people. In a similar fashion, because this woman would use astrology as her tool of choice, but people these days instead use internet memes and labels as their tool of choice. Everything is red pill or black pill, or you fit some kind of box that needs to be ticked, and the minute you make a statement about any given topic, that box gets ticked in the mind of the person you're talking to. And there's no escaping this. Internet labels have ruined our ability to communicate with each other. And funnily enough, these labels are pretty much only applicable to people who are perpetually online. Now, full disclosure, I too have partly contributed to this. I have used terms like red pill, black pill, normie, and other words to describe the world. But a lot of this just comes down to be perfectly blunt, feeding the algorithm gods. It's just a simple fact that YouTube is more reactive to certain terms and words you use as opposed to others. And people are rarely, if ever, a composite of some pill or particular category you put them in the sense that there typically is a lot more variety than you might think. Now, I bring this up because a couple of weeks ago I was talking with some people, and we're talking about mating and dating, not a topic I really talk about much outside of this channel, to be perfectly honest, but it did come up, and there was a guy in the chat who was quote-unquote blue pill. And one of the guys in the chat DMs me and says, this guy is so blue-pilled. Now, despite this guy being blue-pilled, he did, on occasion, make some decent points. But the other guy talking to him was dismissing everything he said because he had already put him in the box. He was a so-called blue pillar. At a later junction in time, I was talking about the relevance and importance of looks in the mating and dating game. And before I could even expand upon that, I immediately had somebody ask me if I was quote-unquote black-pilled. And of course, I've been called black-pilled. And if people want to use that label for me, that's perfectly fine. But in essence, I was simply trying to give a descriptive account of how it works. That looks, in fact, are very important in the mating and dating game, but don't necessarily guarantee long-term success once the relationship is started. After a period of about a year or so, effectively the honeymoon period. And this is backed up by data and articles and studies that I personally read, as well as content I've consumed by people that are actual researchers. But I couldn't even get there because this guy had nailed me, had pinned me down as black-pilled. And the same thing is applied if you talk about hypergamy, which has been a boo word for quite some time. And it's a real thing, but quote-unquote red pillars, if you want to call them that, have used this term so frequently, and often in situations and contexts where it's just not even applicable, that people out there just associate the term with quote-unquote red pillars, Rollo Tomassi and their ilk. And that's fine, I guess, but it's also detrimental because it prevents effective communication and everyone ends up getting pigeonholed. Another example that I frequently encounter is people referring to me as some kind of National Socialist. Now, why they call me a National Socialist? Because I think that genetics are very important for human outcomes. How smart you are, your conscientiousness, your psychological resistance or lack thereof to depression, all these things, amongst many, many others, contribute heavily to life outcomes. Not exclusively. There are environmental factors at play, of course, although I would also say we don't always really have perfect control, actually far less than perfect control, of the environmental factors. But genetics do play an important role in all of this. But merely referencing this, for some people, triggers the National Socialist label in them, and then you get shut down and can't continue the conversation, even if your intentions and what you wanted to discuss was fundamentally benign, which in the most recent case where this happened, my intentions absolutely were. So buzzwords and labels have dominated the internet for quite some time now. But unfortunately, they've probably been a lot more destructive than they have been productive or constructive, in the sense that, as I just said, everyone gets reduced down to these labels, and everyone is looking for buzzwords or dog whistles. If you talk about the importance of looks, you're associated, quote-unquote, with the black pill. Everything is a pill that may or may not apply to you. Now, I'm not denying that there's some veracity to the fact that within, quote-unquote, black pill circles, people talk about lookism a lot. That's simply a fact. But what a lot of people do is they find what they view as unsavory qualities about these groups or associations, and they dismiss everything being said by said group or association because of the negativity attached to it. And this has fundamentally ruined, and I do mean completely ruined, our ability to communicate. Funnily enough, it's quote-unquote normies that I usually have the best success with when I'm talking about topics that are a little bit off the beaten track, such as the importance of genetics or free will, or the variables that are operative in mating and dating due to our evolutionary past. I won't say that I'm always successful. I'm just saying that a lot of normies who don't really do much online apart from maybe check their email and maybe watch a fun video on YouTube and play some games are not fully enmeshed and embroiled in internet culture. But the problem is, and this is especially true of Zoomers, the younger they are, the more likely they are to be embroiled in internet culture. I talked about this more extensively in a previous video. So terminally online is something that's going to become the norm, as opposed to the somewhat fringe status it might have now, although the numbers of people who are terminally online are obviously increasing. And these things that I'm talking about, and unfortunately I partly contributed to this with my use of terms and labels, even though sometimes they're appropriate and sometimes they might not be, they are going to make communication absolutely impossible. I've already talked about bubbles and people bunkering down in their bubbles, but there's certain topics that are just always associated with take your pick of any label. So for example, there's a guy who's quite progressive that I've talked to on and off for several months now. And my initial impression after listening to him for 2 or 3 minutes was that he's just a run-of-the-mill progressive. But I took the time to actually talk to him, and the guy turned out to be quite intelligent, obviously very ideological, and in a way that I'm not especially aligned with, at least in some cases. But the guy had nuance, he had subtlety, and he was also open to data and information. But if I had not given him the chance and had never talked to him, he would have just been in some kind of label/bubble. And to be fair, a lot of progressives do fit into that label/bubble, just as a lot of red pillars, black pillars, or what have you do. But I would at least strongly encourage you, when you're engaging with people, to hear them out, at least for a while, before you arrive at conclusions that coincidentally accord with whatever internet label, meme, or pill you might have learned about. Because you might end up being surprised at the end of the day. And more important than that, in my humble opinion, that is the only way we're going to be able to communicate with each other going forward, is by giving people a chance and listening to them, asking them questions, as opposed to reducing them to just a term or a snarky label that makes sense in terms of internet algorithms, but not so much in terms of human interaction. Anyway, pretty important topic in my humble opinion, lest we completely lose our ability to communicate with each other. And as always, thank you for tuning in. Many special thanks to my patrons on Patreon and my donors on PayPal. Without you guys, this channel could not exist, so you have my everlasting gratitude. As for everybody else, if you can leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe, the usual YouTube jazz would be much appreciated. I hope it helps. Until the next time, if I'm still alive, I'll check you out then, and may the gods truly watch over you. Bye-bye for now. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.